The Fire Emblem Fates meta has changed a lot in the past 10 years.
Good night, lost child.
Incredibly skilled players have spent years squeezing every last bit of potential from the units that were once considered to be the worst in the game. And as it turns out, there are no units in this game that are truly unusable. But there is one unit whose potential still goes almost completely unrecognized. A unit so overlooked that you won't even be able to find him on any of the tier lists made for the game. A unit that a lot of players don't even realize is available. But that changes today, because in the next hour, you'll be learning everything you could ever want to know about what might be the most underrated unit in Fire Emblem history. After you subscribe to celebrate my first time covering a Conquest unit on my channel. Dua is a unit that only grows more useful the more you know about the game, so there's no better person to join me for this discussion than Scepti, one of this game's most accomplished challenge runners, and the person that orchestrated a setup to kill the final boss while using only level 1 Dua. There really is nothing that's impossible in this game with the help of a brave Axkamilla dual strike partner.
Yeah, I mean, those barely contributed anything else besides Dua. It was really just there for Rose's Thorns, so don't worry about that at all. Dua is one of the best units in the game.
Dua is one of the many units you can purchase from the Einherjar shop. So the Einherjar shop can be purchased in my castle after chapter 11 and is a place where you can spend your gold to purchase units. The most common way to use this shop is by purchasing copies of your own units. For instance, if you have a capped statted Ryoma on your team, you can just purchase a second Ryoma and he'll perform terribly. Or there are some generic units that you can unlock by upgrading the Einherjar shop and giving you additional options to purchase. And Dua is one of the ones that is purchasable after unlocking the first tier shop.
Yeah, there's a lot of different Einherjar units. Some of them aren't very good, but some of them are pretty strong. Dua here is incredible. I mean, look at these stats.
Yeah, Dua, alongside with all of his other fellow generic Einherjars, have 0 personal bases, so every stat that he has comes from his class base. So any unit that is reclassed into fighter class will adopt these class bases in addition to their personal stats. However, fighter personal bases are actually pretty good. So 7 strength and 6 speed at level 1 alongside a 19 HP, that is, I think that's better bulk than Mozu.
Yeah, and he comes with the HP plus 5 skill, so that's actually 24 HP. He would need to level up once for it, but he will learn it immediately within his first level.
Yeah.
And then while they don't have personal bases, they do have personal growth. It's just shared with the capturable generics of their class. Dua has a huge personal, 40% personal strength, and 20% from his class is where he gets 60. So, you know, their growths aren't the worst.
His growth total is higher than both Gunter and Fuga, and just immediately out of the box, Dua comes with a more impressive kit than Mozu, being able to at least do damage to Mozu Paralog Faceless if they recruited at the same time, and also live a hit from them, so a lot less useless than Mozu is, although his joining time is significantly later, being after chapter 11 for Dua. But the fighter class is actually one of the better ones to have around in Conquest, notably for its class pair of being 4 strength and 2 speed. A lot of people love keeping like Arthur and Charlotte around just for those pair bonuses, and those go even higher when promoting, going to 5 strength and 3 speed if you are able to get Dua to level 10 and a Master Seal.
Yeah, the Berserker 5 strength, 3 speed is obviously really good. You can also occasionally use Hero because it's 3 speed, 2 defense, 3 skill, and speed and defense almost never come together in class pair-ups. So having a way to get a speed defense pair-up is also pretty nice.
Yeah, and Dua's growths are actually not too bad in the context of Conquest, like having a 60% strength growth compared to the Conquest cast is really not that bad. Especially when you are able to start at level 1 and you have that time to grow. If you really want to invest in Dua, he is not going to be the absolute worst unit to invest in if you just want something that's able to kill things.
Yeah, as far as strength growth in Conquest go, there's only a handful of units with a higher personal strength growth than him. Like 10 of them have a higher personal strength growth than Dua. So he's doing pretty well on strength, and even of the units who do have a higher personal strength growth, he starts in fighter, which has a very high strength growth modifier, whereas most of those other units would not start in a class as good as Fighter. And strength is probably the best offensive stat in Conquest. You can't kill an enemy with pure speed, but you can kill them with pure strength, and one-shotting enemies with a hand axe is extremely effective in a lot of Conquest chapters.
Oh yeah. The issue with Dua is actually getting him to the point where he is able to deal significant damage, because if you look at the maps immediately after his joining time, unless you are saving Mosey's Paralog until right after you were able to buy Duas, his next few maps do have like reasonably high stat benchmarks and non-trivial time pressure.
Yeah, it's a little tough, but this is Fates. You always have the option to basically stack your units to such insane degrees that you can really get past his early low-level start and get him rolling if you really want to. It's not too bad.
The thing about Chapter 12 that makes raising Dua particularly difficult is the hard turn limit, which if you're able to feed only 1 kill per turn to a unit like Dua as you're continuing to move forward, you'll still get a lot of experience, but you aren't able to degen in the same way as you would in slower paced maps of, say, mid-game Birthrights.
Yeah, and the matchups that he has in Chapter 12 aren't the best. There's a couple ninjas, but there's a lot of like samurais as well, and apothecaries, which are pretty bulky. Fortunately, Chapter 13 is much more favorable. 13 has functionally no time pressure. There is an outlaw going for the villages, but he has 3 move and you can just kill him. So if you wanted to grind up Dua, 13 and 14 would definitely be the place to do it, because 14 has no time pressure at all.
The one concern that I have about Chapter 13 is its deployment limit is relatively low, and fitting Dua is not always going to be the best thing you want to be doing with those 10 slots, but you're definitely going to be able to put in some work if you're able to manage the pace that you go through that map very well.
Yeah, unfortunately, Dua doesn't support anyone, so it is really hard to find a spot for him when you're with low deployment slots, because you usually want to be working on your supports, and he just doesn't contribute to that. But let's be real, you're working on supports to get better pair-up anyways, and he's got the best pair-up ever, so...
Yeah, and notably, even if he's being a parabot, that isn't actually the worst way to gain experience in Fates. If you stick him onto one of your better units, like, say, Xander, for instance, and Xander's doing, like, 20 combats every single map, you're gonna get a lot of chip experience just from the dual guards alone.
Yeah, as long as the unit who is getting dual guarded is counterattacking in that combat, you do get a small bit of passive EXP. If your only goal is like to get to rally strength, you can usually get there off of passive dual guard EXP alone.
Although I'm pretty sure that dual guard EXP does not benefit from the bonus of being underleveled though, right?
It gets penalized by being over-leveled, which is almost the same thing.
Okay.
But no, being under-leveled does not improve it at all.
Yeah. And another notable thing that Dua has over a lot of other units is that you don't have to just stop at one Dua. You can get as many of them as you want for the low cost of 1,500 gold, which is less than the cost of a steel weapon, right?
Yeah, steel weapons are 2k.
Yeah, so you can just get more than one Dua and have multiple fighter backpacks in addition to Arthur and Starlight, which not the worst niche to fill. If you're really hurting for things to boost your offenses, and for instance, you've got Arthur and Charlotte dipping into unorthodox classes, a Dua probably is not your worst option.
Yeah, his pair-up also competes a little bit with Keaton, who has the Wolfskin pair-up, which is pretty similar. But there are a lot of cases where 5 strength, 3 speed is better than 4 and 4. And especially the fact that you can get, like you said, an unlimited number of Duas. It is so cheap. You can just fill out your deployment as much as you want with these, really as often as you want.
Yeah, there are multiple points in the game where Conquest just dumps 10,000 gold onto you, and that's like 6 Duas?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yep, 6 Duas with some change left over. Yeah, if you want to turn every open deployment slot, at least, that you have every chapter with spare Duas, you can for sure do that.
Now, they all do still start at their level 1 bases, so you will still need to train them out of E-rank hell if you're actually going to be using them to do anything besides being a backpack, but still far from the worst place a unit can be in.
Well, they're not exactly useless as level 1 units with no weapons or stats, but I think we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Now, looking at his class set, generally this is the longest portion of the video where we go over every single class we can put a unit in, but Dua makes our lives very easy today because he only has his base class set of Fighter, having its promotions Berserker and Hero being his only promoted class options unless you're going for DLC.
You can basically never reclass them. You can technically heart seal them between the two promoted classes, but that's only for duos that get to promotion anyways, so most of them are going to just stay in Fighter forever, which isn't the best class to be stuck in, but it's on the high end.
Axes having notably pretty good weapon access in the context of Conquest. For those of you from my channel that are more used to Birthrights, fortunately we do not have the +5 crits minus hits of Birthright clubs, which are not great. Axes are just so much better.
Yeah, and one of the only two dual weapons that you get in Conquest is an axe, so that's one of the few Birthright weapon types that is quite good that we don't lose out on going into Conquest, whereas every other weapon type is losing out on them.
After going through 50 combats, notably, which should be noted for a unit that starts with E rank axes, 0 weapon experience.
Or 20 in an arm scroll. There are a handful of arm scrolls in Conquest, and they aren't too heavily contested, so it's not impossible that you could allocate one.
And if you're really fiending for Supreme Combat Dua, he does have Berserker access, so you can, grind up his weapon rank and then use an arm scroll to get to the Brave Axe, or even the S rank axe, the Argomir.
And both the Brave Axe and the Argomir do very well into late game Conquest. Brave Axe is one of the best options for killing Takumi. It's also a pretty solid weapon at getting through wary fighter generals in late game.
And that, on top of his 65% strength growth in Berserker, means he will actually be properly able to kill things.
Yeah, he is gaining a pretty solid amount of strength from level ups. If you take him all the way to 20 and 20, that's on average 23 to 24 strength level ups, which is not bad.
Also making use of the Berserker's higher strength cap, which, if you do want to hyper invest into Dua, putting in even energy drops as well, you definitely got room to reach the higher end of what a Berserker can do just by investing in Dua.
Yeah. On average, you'd expect him to get to, 36 strength at 20 and 20 in Berserker, which is only 4 points away from the strength cap for the Berserker. So, with 2 energy drops, he is already hitting the Berserker's cap strength.
So we have mentioned that Dua cannot give other units benefits from being their pair partner from personal support bonuses. A unit with good personal support bonuses cannot transfer those personal bonuses to Dua because they cannot support with Dua, just like with any other captured or generic units. So Dua notably cannot benefit from, say, a Charlotte pair-up for that extra +7.
Charlotte gets 8 strength.
8? Okay.
Yeah, so Charlotte pairing into him would only be 5 strength, 3 speed, same as his, not her usual 8 strength, 5 speed.
Yeah. So the absolute ceiling that Dua can reach is of course going to be lower than other units, even before factoring in his inability to get access to skills from other classes. So, maybe not your best Talk Me Killer option. I don't think he can even reach the threshold without, extra help from things like Rose's Thorns and Enfeeble, right?
Yeah, but then again, a lot of units do need to use Rose's Thorns and Enfeeble, or at least that's their easiest access. Off the top of my head, Dua Takumi kill seems dubious, but not impossible. He's got Berserker, which if you only had one class to do it in, you'd prefer Samurai, but Berserker's a close second, so he could probably get pretty close. So 40 strength, +4 from rally strength, brings him up to 44. Then he gets to 52 after the Brave Axe's 8 might. Another 3 from Camilla is 55. Another 4 from Enfeeble is 59. 2 from Atonic, forgot that.
Did you get Axe Fair yet?
Nope. We've still got quite a ways to go, yeah. So Axe Fair takes him to 68. You can apply Inspiration. Camilla can get Inspiration from Elise, which is another 2, up to 70. Then we don't even have a pair-up yet, so he can get to 75 with a pair-up. What's another source of 2? There's a bunch of them. Laszlo is 1, and then Axe Rank bonus is another, at least 1, depending on your Axe Rank.
Yeah.
So that's 77. That's the Takumi kill done. So he can do it. You need Strategist Camilla, which I've done it for Takumi kills before.
So the ceiling that Dua can reach is definitely not far from the ceiling that some of your other mid-tier Conquest units can kind of get capped by. The fighter class, for offensive benchmarks, is still one of the best in the game, but it's still less versatile than a lot of your other units due to its still mediocre 5 going to 6 movement after promoting, and Limited bulk.
The defense is admittedly pretty abysmal, but at least his HP is decent. Unfortunately, because he doesn't ever have access to 1-2 range that can double, he does not get nearly as much out of guard gauge as other units would. Typically, a unit taking an attack and then countering twice, which gives them 3 pips of guard gauge every combat, and so they block every other attack on enemy phase. Dua, on the other hand, is taking a hit and then one-shotting with a hand axe in retaliation, meaning it takes him an additional combat to get his guard gauge, which is a pretty major bulk loss.
Most of his bulk is coming from HP, which definitely is not the worst place to be in, because it does apply regardless of whether you're getting hit on the physical or magical end. He will still have hit issues against magical enemies. His skill personal base is, of course, 0, though the fighter class isn't the worst for boosting that. But Gamble certainly is not ideal.
Yeah, you'll need to take that off as quickly as possible, and unfortunately you will have to put up with it on the map you learn it, which does suck, but nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Notably, because his bulk does come entirely from HP, he will never have issues of being ignored, like a lot of the stronger Conquest units like Camilla and Xander can run into. Enemies are always going to want to attack him, so he can always counterattack, which is, not useless. And on top of that, this is Conquest, where the enemies don't hit very hard anyways. They're pretty weak, so he can probably take several hits if you want him to. But it's definitely not in the realm of the very bulky units who can, take endless streams of enemies without any help.
Just gaining a single level, he has more than a coin flip's odds of gaining HP, as well as being guaranteed to get HP plus 5, bringing his physical bulk to 20 HP, plus 5 from HP plus 5, plus an additional 4 from the defense stat, giving him 29 physical bulk, which is nothing to sneeze at for a level 2 unit. It's actually pretty solid. There's a fair chunk of enemies in the entirety of Conquest that have less than 29 attack. And this is even before tonics and meals and pair-ups.
Yeah, when considering that he has weapon triangle advantage, Master Ninjas in Conquest Chapter 17 only have 15 strength with 7 might steel shurikens, so that's only 22 attack. Yeah, they're doing 18 damage to him before any modifiers at all. So with a general pair-up, that takes him to 13 damage, and a defense tonic to 11, he survives a Conquest 17 Master Ninja.
And that's at level 2, right?
That is at level 2. If you were to level him higher, he would probably avoid getting doubled by killing them.
Yep. But yeah, beyond HP plus 5, the fighter class does of course have a lot of good utility. The main one that a lot of your fighter class units want to go into is Rally Strength, which is obtained from level 5 Berserker, one of the most useful utility roles in Conquest.
Yeah, Rally Strength it's an incredible ability. It's an ability that you basically always want, and if you ever want to use a Berserker like Charlotte or Arthur for combat, they are severely held back by the fact that they can't cast their own Rally Strength on themselves, and so a unit like Dua can resolve that problem for you by being a second copy of it, or you can have then use it on him.
And of course, if you go even further into the Berserker class line, you will get access to Axe Fair, which, if you're going for the Takumi kill or want to make Dua just generally useful as a player phase option for getting kills, Axe Fair definitely is not a bad skill.
Yeah, I would generally consider it the best of the fair skills, mostly because of the weapons that can double at range, bows, tomes, and shurikens. In a Conquest context, you're just hitting those kill benchmarks anyways because you can double, whereas axes really need every bit of push they can get because they can't double at range, and so need to one-shot. So it's the strongest fair skill to get.
And of course, on the other end, Dua does also have access to the hero class, at level 5 giving him access to Soul, which on Dua is actually not very useful because Soul is at its most useful on units with large defense stats, which reduces the amount of damage they take per hit down very, very low, meaning that Soul's inconsistency can be made up for in the ability to take more hits per Soul proc, while Dua has most of his bulk shoved all the way into the HP stat, meaning that any damage that he takes corresponds to fewer hits being dealt to him.
Yeah, and he also, again, just doesn't have that unrestricted 1-2 range, and while you can just make do with hand axes to kill the enemies, you can't proc Soul with those hand axes. So while he's fighting at range, he can't use it, and you need to fight at range a lot in Fates. So his soul is going to be turned off most of the time, even if you do learn it. So it's not the best on him, which also goes for Axebreaker. It's not the greatest on him. Admittedly, if you are going into hero, you can use it for some purposes like dodge tanking the Berserkers in chapter 26. But it's overall not the greatest skill. Axe enemies don't have a lot of avoid, so getting plus 50 hit against them isn't that helpful.
That, and you have plenty of other options against axe fighters, namely Xander, so using Dua in level 15 hero probably not going to be the best option you have access to at that point in the game.
Yeah, I suppose he wouldn't be the worst answer to the general Berserker room in chapter 26.
True.
You could get him to D-rank axes for the hammer through the generals, and then have Axebreaker to survive the Berserkers. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not fantastic. Generally, Xander is going to do a much better job at that, because he can soul at 1-2 range with the Siegfried.
And notably, one thing that Dua does have over Xander is that Dua has hero in his base class sets, while Xander does have to marry or friendship for it.
Yes. And while Xander does have both a marriage and a friendship that give it to him, yeah, Dua just has it at base with no supports needed.
So, let's see how Dua compares to the standard benchmark that I've been using for Birthright comparisons, and you'll see that things are not exactly skewed in his favor because I have given this Dua no experience.
Yeah, it doesn't look great for him.
But even at level 1, Dua does have a place compared to other Conquest units because he does have a very, very solid role that he can fill. But we'll get back to that later. The more realistic way that you're going to raise Dua is as a utility unit, which these comparisons aren't always the best at representing. So we've got here a new layout for comparing specifically utility units. So on this slide, we are going to be comparing a Dua that is a level 5 Berserker promoted level 10 with a Arthur that has gone through the same class pathing.
And looking at them, the most notable difference between the two is Arthur's much better defense stat. Other than that, Dua is keeping up in most areas.
-2 strength in exchange for +1 speed might be a trade that you're willing to take a fair amount of the time. And having greater than 0 luck definitely isn't the worst thing to have, especially while not having to deal with the misfortunate personal skill in Berserker.
Both of these units do have 0 crit evade, but Dua is much further from climbing out of the hole, out of his negative crit evade. He only has -4, whereas Arthur has -10 here.
Yes, because notably, Berserker does have the way boosted crit chance, but they are also more susceptible to being crits.
So Arthur, even with a bronze axe, still has 0 sev, whereas Dua with a bronze axe gets all the way up to 6 critical evade.
Now, of course, these are both going to be primarily utility units, maybe getting 1 kill per turn that they aren't going to be using Rally Strength on. And for that role, they are both completely competent. Like, promoted level 5 after early promoting is very, very attainable reasonably early in the game.
So this is functionally a level 20 unit, so you'd be getting this right around when promoted enemies start appearing, because notably you can't train Conquest units in chapter 15 because it is the Goron solo chapter, which is right around when you start getting units to internal level 20, so you'd probably pick it up sometime early in chapter 16. If you can be feeding them regularly.
And with 33 HP, 16 speed, Dua doesn't even perform terribly as a combat unit in the upcoming ninja map.
Yeah, against ninjas, he'll be doing absolutely fine. The stats on enemy ninjas in Conquest are some of the most hilariously bad enemy stats in pretty much all of Fates. So if you're going in there with even D-rank axes and 20 strength, you'll be totally fine. It takes 40 attack to one-shot a ninja. His strength gets him there halfway already. You know, you can get a bronze axe +1. That's 8 my tonics too. Then you need 10, 5 from a pair up, 1 from Laszlo, 3 from Camilla, 1 from any other source, and he just one-shots ninjas.
And of course you can just go with even stronger weapons. For instance, you do get free steel axes in this game, so giving Dua access to those probably a pretty good option if you're able to fix your hit in another way.
Yeah. Fortunately, while he can't benefit from most support bonuses, he can get the passive 10 from adjacency. So he can still get that in order to patch up his hit. And Rally Skill and Rally Luck are both good rallies to rush early game on either a captured Shrine Maiden or someone like Felicia, who can go into Bow Knight. So if you're rushing those hit boosting rallies anyways, you'll have access to give them to Dua for these types of projects.
And again, looking at his growths in Berserker, they are also very solid, being 75 in HP, 65 in strength, 50 in speed, so dumping the bulk stats, but the offensive stats that are allowing Dua to get these kills are definitely going to stay on par, even once you get later into the game.
Yeah, his growths on Berserker are pretty solid, so he can keep up. 50 speed is genuinely pretty good, and 65 strength is just great.
Yeah.
The 0 res growth is a little bit annoying, but just don't fight mages, or if you do, one-shot them with the dual club.
Notably, he does suffer from the issue of being difficult to heal completely because that HP pool is just massive, and your staff units in Conquest probably are not going to be the most magically inclined, or at least the ones that are magically inclined. You might not want to keep them in a staff-locked class.
Yeah, I'm generally of the opinion that I don't like having staves around for healing almost at all in Conquest. But even then, Dua is hard to top off with vulneraries and concoctions, because he does have a pretty big HP pool. 38 HP here, they've both got HP plus 5, so that's actually 38. A concoction is only doing like half of his HP, whereas most units just get put to full by it.
So, at this point in the game, Dua and Arthur are extremely comparable. The issue with Dua is that once you get past this point, he has a lot fewer options in growing in other ways than just leveling up in Berserker. And to illustrate that, if we reclass Arthur immediately at this point and go into the Paladin class or Great Knight class, depending on your preference, Arthur can pick up a lot more utility.
Yeah, Shelter is far and away the best skill in the game, and then obviously having 8 movement becomes a pretty significant advantage, so Dua starts to lose out. But notably, Arthur is taking a contested art seal in order to fill this supportive role, whereas Dua just sort of does his thing for free. So I don't actually mind too much lacking out on the ceiling that other units have on Dua, simply because his floor is good enough.
Yeah, and if you look at this Arthur at this point, he notably also has Elbow Room, which can make up for the deficit in strength that he has in Paladin. Or, if you go to the Great Knight's path, his strength will be higher than the Paladin, Arthur, while also being able to keep his axe access, meaning that he won't even be losing out on his ability to use things like the hand axe or hammer or the dual club, and he will still be giving a movement pair up as well.
Yes. Great Knight pair up is also fantastic for defense 2 strength. Not as good as Berserker, but still pretty applicable.
And having all this utility on one unit, notably, is not something that you'll absolutely need to have, because Arthur realistically probably isn't going to be sheltering and rally strengthening on the same turn. So generally, you can have 2 units deployed for those different purposes and be just fine, though having the flexibility of changing what you do turn to turn is nice to have on Arthur.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that Dua can't learn any other options, but Rally Strength is such a good option that you can almost always find a worthwhile reason to click it every turn. So if you're going to be locked to just one option, it's a pretty good one.
The other point of comparison a lot of people have to Dua is the other fighter that starts in that class, which is Charlotte, who can also go the same routes instead of promoting to Berserker and diverting to her Heartseal class being Maid. And notably, one thing Charlotte has over Dua is her access to daggers. So even in Maid, her just massive strength stats, along with her incredible speed stats, makes her a very, very solid combat option.
Yeah, she can also go into a class like Hero to pick up Soul if she wants to improve that combat a little bit more. Or she can go into Strategist and get Rally Resistance to further improve her auras. So Charlotte's ceiling actually sits quite a bit higher than this. So in terms of a support role, she probably does outdo Dua, though Dua does have a small availability lead on her. He joins a chapter earlier and can start training immediately in her join map, whereas she has to wait to show up.
And of course, Charlotte does have the additional utility of being able to provide her personal pair of bonuses, so even with her less than optimal Maid class bonuses only giving magic and luck instead of the massive 5 strength, she can make up for it slightly with the +3 strength, +2 speed at S rank support.
Yes, her personal power bonuses are ridiculous. So even in Maid, she's giving 3 strength, 5 speed at S, which is almost as good as Dua's, despite the fact that she is in a magical class. So
Yeah.
it's pretty hard to compare with Charlotte in terms of utility.
Notably, if you want to go to the weird reclass options for Charlotte, that does cost even more contested seals. Being a soul mage does cost 2 heart seals, and going into strategist to get rally resistance, which isn't really a rally that is in super high demand in Conquest, will force you to use Charlotte as either a tome unit or a staff unit, which will make getting to that EXP real difficult unless you have already reclassed to Maid beforehand and gained the 2 unpromoted skills there.
Yeah, if your only intent is to click rally every turn and you don't care about the combat, you can go straight from Berserker into Strategist and just pick up the 3 levels with tomes and then never use her for combat again, which does lose you out on the option to occasionally kill things with her as a maid in exchange for rally res. Overall, it's not much of an increase, but it is an option, and it's a level of flexibility that Dua just doesn't have. He's forced to stick exactly in his lane. He can't experiment depending on what your team comp needs.
And notably, Dua being able to reclass into an 8 movement class like Arthur and Charlotte can hurts his ability to keep up in longer maps, because notably his 6 movement isn't as high as the 9 movement that your best units in Camilla will have. So getting Dua to rally for Camilla every single turn will require additional tools that you might not want to be spending just for a rally strength user.
Yeah. In terms of his movement is definitely going to lag behind. I don't actually find that it's the literal number that's going to hold him back, as much as the fact that he can't fly. Charlotte can, for instance, friendship Baruka and get access to Wyvern, and then she has flying, rally strength, and defense. And the ability to fly is so important for so much of Conquest's later mid-game in terms of movement, that it is really hard to move a unit that can't fly around. It's not great.
Yeah.
So things are pretty much fine, and then you get first to chapter 19, which almost every tile is covered in forests. And so if you can't fly, you are moving like 2 tiles a turn, and you can't move over the mountains, you have to go around them. And then immediately after that, you have Fuga's map, which is almost entirely flyer-only terrain, and then the Eternal Staircase, which you have to take the long snaking route around if you don't want to just fly straight up the edges. Then after that, you get the Sakura map, which has a couple shortcuts flyers can take, but is one of the few footlocked friendly maps. But then Takumi's Wall, you can either fly straight to the staircases, it takes you like 2 turns of movement to get there, or go all the way around. And then the Hinoka map, where flyers have 12 movement. So it is a string of 5 or 6 maps in a row where it is just miserable to be an infantry unit.
And of course, both Arthur and Charlotte can marry or friendship into flying classes to completely avoid this problem, if you're willing to invest that resource into them.
Yes, and notably the flying class lines also come with rallies. If Arthur marries into Falcon Knight, he picks up rally speed. If Charlotte friendships into Wyvern, she picks up rally defense. Whereas, Dua is forced to stick with only rally strength.
So Dua is probably not going to be your first choice as a unit picking up these utility roles, just because, unlike Arthur and Charlotte, Dua does cost money to obtain. You do have to spend the 15,000 gold and enough experience to get him to level 10 and promoting to level 5 to get rally strength. But once he's there, he's still good enough to fulfill his role and be a decent filler combat unit.
Yeah, it's functional enough. As far as Einherjar goes, this is about as good as it gets for utility and combat.
But of course, this is not the only role that Dua has, because, as I alluded to before, Dua does notably have a niche over one of the strongest units in Birthright, a level 5 Master Ninja Saizo, because one of the best ways to trivialize a Conquest map is by using Sac Strats.
Yes, sacrifice strats are so broken. The game just clearly was not designed with them in mind, and so having access to an infinitely respawnable, buyable unit allows you to just cheat on a ton of maps.
Yeah. The more you know about Fire Emblem Fates' AI, the easier it is to exploit, because once you know exactly which enemy is going to be acting first and going for a kill that it sees, you can just plan around that to plan the rest of your turn, pretending that that enemy does not exist, and allowing you to do some truly degenerate stuff.
Yeah, it's very powerful. You can basically just increase the bulk of any unit on any given turn by one attack. By putting a unit who dies in range, they will immediately die, and then that will gray out that enemy's turn. That enemy doesn't get to move. It's functionally a buyable free staff.
Yes, of course the free staff does exist, which makes Dua a questionable cost-benefit analysis when in comparison to buying more free staves. But Dua does get to benefit from the guard gauge, which does build up naturally if he is in the back of a pair-up. So if you have enough opportunities to see combat with a unit that Dua is backpacking for, he can build up his guard gauge, and in addition to living the first hit, he can live a second hit with the guard gauge built up.
And the other advantage to Dua is that, well, yes, you can buy free staves. You can only buy so many of them. Once you're out of them, you're out of them for the rest of the game. There is no limit to the amount of Duas you can buy.
So the free staff requires you to spend one use for the chance of it hitting. But if you send Dua in range of enemies, there's still a chance for them to miss him. So sometimes Dua can just double in value. Burning a freeze charge on a miss is just a waste of gold. And even if enemies don't see lethal on Dua, one thing that makes enemies a lot more likely to go after Dua as compared to your other units is his massive bulk is almost entirely stored in his HP pool, and given everything else is equal, Fate's enemies generally prefer to go for their maximum expected damage. So when given the option to attack a unit with 10 resistance to Dua, who will either have 1 resistance in Fighter or 0 resistance as a Berserker, the mage is almost certainly going to go for Dua unless the mage can see lethal on another unit.
So, in terms of manipulating AI, a unit with terrible bulk is actually really useful. If you've ever played a game like FE12, you know just how useful knowing what the enemy can do can be for you. And it's a lot harder to know what the enemies are going to do in Conquest, because they have so many little factors that they consider. But Dua is at the top of the line for basically every factor that they consider, and so you can trust that the enemies will probably attack him if they don't literally have lethal on someone else.
And being aware that an enemy will act out of turn and go for any kill that they can see makes things even easier, because if you have something like that set up, you can set up actually some really nice body blocks in certain maps, where you can build up Dua's guard gauge and have him effectively choke a point by not killing the enemy that's going to go in the tile next to him.
Yes. And another useful thing is that enemies who have a debuffing skill will prefer to move earlier in the turn order than enemies who don't. So if you put Dua in range of those debuffers, he takes a debuff, the next debuffing enemy attacks and kills him. The enemies who would have debuffed your carry now have already spent their actions on removing Dua from the field, and then the rest of the enemies who might not have debuffs, or at least will have weaker ones, will take their turns and then die on your carry, and you can bypass things like Seal Defense or Poison Strike or Grisly Wound that way.
Now, of course, there is still a finite number of Duas that you can buy, but they are still relatively affordable at 1,500 gold each, which is less than a steel weapon, and the Einherjar shop can get discounted just like the staff shop. So if you have an axe-wielding unit in the Einherjar shop, you can just buy more Duas at that point. And if you have another unit, let's say a sword user in the Einherjar shop, you can buy Unils instead.
Is there an Einherjar accessory? I will actually have to look that up, because I have never checked that. There is not.
Okay.
So you will actually just have to be going with luck of the draw for who ends up working at the shop. But yeah, there are a bunch of cheap ones. As long as they have a weapon type in common with one of the cheap ones, you can buy it.
Yep. Dua does still notably have some competition when it comes to Sac Strats. Notably, Mozu is probably the biggest one, because she comes at the lower cost of free and is available even earlier than Dua in Paralog 1, which can be done immediately after Chapter 7. While Dua, you have to wait for after Chapter 11, so that is quite the availability gap.
Yeah, and then even in terms of stats, while Dua does have the higher HP, Mozu has higher speed, so if you're trying to avoid getting doubled to use them on 2 separate enemies before they die, Mozu is better at avoiding the double, whereas Dua takes a little more work, especially if she gains a couple levels because her speed growth is so high. But your disadvantage of Mozu is you only get 1 Mozu, so once you use her, she's gone, whereas Dua you can replace.
Yeah. And with Dua, notably, it's easier to increase his bulk without reducing his targeting priority because his growths are still super HP skewed, and you immediately get the HP plus 5 skill at level 2, meaning that it is very easy to get Dua to a point where he's not dying to the immediate first hits, and he can actually last just a little bit longer as a unit that is basically having the provoke skill.
Whereas once you level Mozu, she gets really fast and she gets a ton of defense, which is ideal for surviving enemies, but it's not ideal for dying to enemies, which is what you want a unit like this to do.
And not to mention, Mozu also has the terrible para bonus of plus 3 skill, plus 3 luck in base at Villager. So your ability to build up guard gauge on Mozu is going to be a lot less than your ability to get it on Dua, who will be benefiting your units that are seeing combat a lot more.
Yeah. Even if you reclass Mozu, like 2 strength, 2 skill, 2 speed is still not as good as Dua's 4 strength, 2 speed, and then that's even more investment into a unit who you are treating as disposable.
So let's look at Conquest's maps and see where Dua can be particularly useful. Anything stick out to you?
So the ones that are most obvious are actually a lot of the later ones.
Yeah.
Chapter 25 comes to mind. Chapter 25 has enemies which have 3-range spies weapons and lunge, which can be really daunting to figure out how to deal with at first. The obvious answer is to freeze staff them, but as said, freeze staves are kind of limited, and you do have to hit the freeze staves. The other really easy answer is to put a unit who dies to 1 or 2 lunges in range of the lunge chain. Dua will get shot at by one of the enemies, get lunged, maybe he dies, maybe he doesn't, depending on which you'd prefer, however you set him up. Then the second enemy attacks him, also lunges, and then the lunge chain is broken because Dua dies and the rest of the chain can't proceed. And you've now isolated these lunging enemies that have now lunged into your units to be killed instead of lunging one of your units away from them. That's probably the most powerful place to use it. Chapter 25 is notoriously difficult if you aren't just rushing Ryoma, and it is completely trivialized by disposable units. It becomes laughably easy because all of the traps in the chapter just don't work.
And Dua is very notable for being super well equipped for Chapter 25 in particular, because the spies weapons cannot double, so they are purely hitting the physical bulk benchmark one time, and Dua has invested all of his points into HP, which makes it really easy to stack just enough HP to live that first lunge if you so choose.
Yeah, you can just decide exactly how many steps deep into the lunge chain you want him to go. By adjusting his HP and defense, you don't have to worry about speed at all. So it's really nice.
And on that same note, speaking of high-range enemies that you might not be able to kill immediately, Chapter 21, the Endless Staircase, has the Stoneborn, which, on turns where you're not using the map-wide freeze, have, I think it's an effective 8 range, 5 of which they can attack from even without moving, so those are massive threats on the entire map that you can trivialize by having a Dua take aggro away from your other more valuable units.
It's 4 movement, 5 attack range, so they actually have 9 effective range. And the Massive Rocks hit very hard. Massive Rock has 15 might, so a lot of units can really struggle to survive that. But Dua has awful avoid and awful bulk. You can leave him in range of a Massive Rock and he gets shot at and dies. And then it pulls that rock away from your other unit, and they will have their full HP total to deal with whatever enemy phase they were planning on doing.
And another notable map is actually Conquest's Chapter 23, the Takumi Great Wall, where, notably on Lunatic difficulty, there are enemies blocking access to the stairs on the right side of the map, so having a disposable unit like Dua climb the left stairs and bait the enemies away from their stair blocking positions can be really useful.
Yes, 23 is another one where you would typically solve it with a status staff, and Trap is an easy way to get those enemies off the stairs. But again, you only have finite in traps, and you might want to use those in other places, and so Dua can work for that.
You know, the more I think about it, the more I think that Entrap is just kinda bad. It's a B rank staff, and Izana doesn't even have B rank when he joins. Flora does start with B staves, but her stats give her 7 less staff hit than Izana. And that's a really big deal, since the Entrap staff only has 60 hit. That's like, it's only 10 hit more than the Hexing Rod, and good luck hitting that one. The Chapter 23 Basaras have more staff avoid than Flora has staff hit, so she only has 53 displayed hit with the Entrap. And the only place in the game where you can get an Entrap is by buying it from the staff shop. You can only buy the staff twice. Each of them has 2 charges for 2,500 gold, so in this case, Dua is actually the value option.
Especially because the enemies up there are Basaras, who have magic, whereas none of the other enemies up there are magical. So you can get Dua into a position where you stack some physical bulk on him, but no magical bulk, so that the enemy who immediately sees lethal are the Basaras, because your Dua has 1 to 0 resistance.
And notably, being a unit with 0 resistance and terrible luck also means that he is one of the most attractive units for status staff users to be going for. One of their tiebreakers, if units are in range of the same number of enemies, is their staff hit. So it is possible to place Dua in a position where the game thinks that he is in range of many units, even if he is not, so that status staves go for him instead of your other frontline units.
Yeah, 14, 16, 18, 26, and endgame are all chapters where that can be hugely beneficial. There's a couple other places like 22 and 20 where it can matter, but really those ones are the ones where it's super helpful to have a unit you can guarantee will have the worst staff avoid on your team, and that you also don't care about them getting enfeebled or hexed or whatever status staff you happen to be running into.
Yeah, and if you would like to learn more about how status staff AI targeting works, there is a very good Zoran video that goes deep into that.
Yes, it's a super useful thing to learn, especially if you're planning to do strats like this. Speaking of 26 for stays, 26 is another one where this is useful. 26 is a chapter where typically you have to have one unit open these doors, and then you have to rush in and player phase these groups if you don't want to deal with units getting status staved. That's how the game clearly intends on you playing it, but a lot of the time you'll get to 26 and that can be difficult. There is a much easier method, which is to have a unit go up to the door, open it, and immediately die. This will aggro every enemy in the room, who will rush out, and you can kill them at your leisure.
Yep.
So Dua is totally capable of going up to one of the doors and opening it with a bronze axe, and then he'll pull the first enemy out because they'll see lethal on him, which will aggro the rest of the room, and then you have an easy way to answer all of the enemies in pretty much any of the rooms in 26.
And of course, Chapter 27 has extremely threatening player phase units just blocking up the path to the boss there. So if you don't want to deal with the spendthrift merchants, an easy way to not deal with them is to have them attack a unit of your choice, being Dua.
Yeah, typically the way to get around them is to just wait and then run past them on the stairs, but then you have only a couple turns before they catch up to you to kill Garen, and sometimes that can be annoying if your Takumi killer is specifically set up for Takumi and not Garen. And so having a unit who you can just sack to those guys to drag them somewhere far away is pretty nice.
Yeah. And notably, his biggest utility is at endgame, where killing off Dua does not hinder your ability to see the full credits roll.
Yep, he is completely expendable, he won't show up in the credits anyway, so you don't lose anything. And endgame is another chapter where sacrifice strats are just really good. The endgame enemies, unlike the rest of the enemies in Conquest, actually have pretty threatening stats, so being able to negate one enemy on a turn is really impactful.
But of course, Dua is not the only unit that can do what Dua does. He does still have real competition from Mozu again, because Mozu isn't just a ball of stats and a terrible backpack. Mozu being a backpack actually benefits the rest of your team because Mozu can support with units like Nyx and Effie and grant them access to the Archer class line, while Dua being a backpack for those units will not give them access to one of the most desirable player phase classes in the game.
Yeah, fortunately for Dua, again, you only get one Mozu, and a lot of the time, once you've put in all the work to get her to a support with a unit like Effie that you care more about, you don't always want to immediately kill her off. But even with her Mozu's maxed out support bonuses, they still aren't as good as Dua's. So he's keeping up.
And notably, after you reach the point where Mozu has been in the backpack of a unit for a while, Mozu has leveled up her bulk to the point where she might not have the worst defense or resistance in your entire army. So while she will still be able to likely get many enemies to see lethal on her if you want them to, it might not apply to all the units on a given map.
And Mozu especially very quickly gets to the point where she's impossible to double, and it is very hard to get an enemy to see immediate lethal on someone they don't double, because Conquest enemies do have such low attack stats. So Mozu gets there pretty fast. Like, this 26 effective physical bulk is already to the point where a ninja cannot one-shot her. So if she leveled enough speed to not get doubled, she'd be in trouble for a Sac Strat. You would have to set her to low HP in advance, which is just more work.
And notably, even if Dua levels up too much for his bulk to be an issue, you can just buy another level 1 Dua.
Yes.
You can also tune his bulk a lot more precisely by removing things like the HP plus 5 skill.
Well, he doesn't start from a lower point than level 1 Mozu, but compared to a leveled Mozu, he's starting at lower raw stats, so you can take him lower, whereas Mozu will always have to deal with her, 7 defense, 4 resistance here.
And one other notable competitor for Dua's Sac Strat utility is Trim, who is another one of the first tier Einherjar that you can get, who notably has 7 movement. Dragging along Dua for a sacrifice that you might be doing relatively late in the map might not be the easiest when you're dragging along a 5 movement infantry unit, but in the case of Trim, she can get by just moving along at a horse's pace with her 7 movements without having to take up a valuable pair-up slot.
Yeah, and even if the sacrifice is early in the map, there are some where having the extra movement helps with positioning. Fortunately, like I said before, I do find the bigger difference in Conquest to be flight compared to the raw movement stat. And since neither of them flies, I'm not too bothered by Dua's lower movement, but it is undeniably a pretty noticeable advantage for Trim.
Yes.
Dua's advantage is that he can hold a weapon. Trim is staff locked, and is staff locked until level 10, which is, a lot of work for a unit you plan on throwing out. And while that does mean Trim can heal, it's pitiful, it's 11 HP, so it's basically irrelevant healing. You can buy a Vulnerary to do the same thing. What it does mean is that Dua can do things like open those doors in Chapter 26 that require you to attack them. Being able to just hold a weapon has a lot more utility for things like this than E-Rank stays does. Except for Rescue, but Rescue is very limited.
Although there may be some instances where you do want to use your Rescue on a unit that is in range of many enemies and would also like to have the aggro of one enemy taken away from your main combat carry, in which case Trim might just be the unit for the job.
Yes.
It's a very, very niche job that you can only do a few times per save file, but when it comes to doing that job, Trim is definitely the unit to do it with.
Yeah, if you aren't planning on one-turning endgame, that is a chapter where that can be really useful. And the big benefit of this is that, not actually an endgame, in any other chapter where you want to do this, Fates is a game where on unit death, their inventories go to the convoy. So if Trim uses one charge of the rescue staff to bring someone to them and then immediately dies, you don't lose the rest of the rescue staff, it will just go straight back to your convoy.
And notably, Trim's Provoke is even stronger than Dua on the physical end because she has 1 defense while Dua has 4. And even on the resistance side, it's easier to get enemies to see lethal on Trim than it is on Dua because her HP pool is just that much smaller.
That does mean that in situations where you're trying to get 1 attack and then guard gauge a lethal attack and then die to a lethal attack, Trim is very bad at it. Trim can't counterattack at all, so it's a lot harder to build mid-enemy phase guard gauge for stuff like that. And then Trim actually does need a decent amount of work to survive the first hit. So it's a difference, but if you are just going for one-shot benchmarks, especially right when you first get them, because right when you first get them, Dua does have 23 physical bulk, which most enemies can't manage to have 23 attack. So Trim can be immediately getting one shot, whereas Dua will be surviving a lot of the weaker enemies.
And there is one more unit that really makes Dua's role not always the easiest to justify spending gold on, because, notably, in Chapter 10, you do have access to Niles and the prison, which allows you to capture some Sky Knights. And the Chapter 10 Sky Knights are notoriously not very bulky. Their HP pool is 23, and their defense stats is 6 without the Naginata. So they have flight, while Dua does not, and they are also free to obtain. Which, while Dua is relatively cheap, 1,500 gold is still the equivalent of 10 tonics. So the Hoshiden Sky Knights that you can get in Chapter 10 are extremely lucrative. But of course, the issue with them is that you still have a finite number of them that you can capture.
Yeah, you can't have the upgrade at prison for that chapter, so you only do get 2 of those, and their ability to fly does come up in places if you're doing Sac Strats, so you generally want to save those for the higher impact ones, whereas Dua can just be thrown at any situation where you need it.
Although, one big thing that Sky Knights have over both Dua and Trim is that they come at level 8, and they are just 2 levels away from being able to promote into Falcon Knight and gain staff access for rescue.
Yes, typically the capture that people bring up for that are the Chapter 23 Falcon Knights, which have pass rescue with 8 move and flight that are really powerful. But if you have something in mind that you want that 8 move flying rescue for before, end game, the Chapter 10 Sky Knights are probably your best bet for it.
And of course, if you want to keep them around, they will still be useful if you are able to get the experience to them, getting to rally speed at some point.
Yeah, Falcon Knight is just a good class to have around, so it's not bad to have. Though once you start investing in them too much, your 8 move, 3 speed pair up flyer that gives rally speed tends to be a little too valuable to just throw away, and so Dua re-earns his niche as the easiest sacrifice fodder.
I actually don't know this, but do captured in Einherjar units give discounts on the shops in my castle?
I don't believe they do. I'm pretty sure the only ones you can have show up in shops are the generics that aren't actually part of your generic roster.
Okay. Another notable thing that you can do with just buyable generics is you can alternate between having an odd and even number of units in order to very, very, very slightly rig the mess hall in your favor.
Yes, I have seen people mention before, like, oh, killing off units in order to make their mess hall better, but that doesn't actually work. Mess hall gives it to a percentage of your units, but because it gives it to 50% of your units, you can change your even and odd parity if you want a very slightly better mess hall.
Yes. Okay, well, technically, if you're using the mess hall really early, it can be impossible for the tier 1 and 2 mess halls to cover your entire deployment slots. Puffing up your numbers with capturables and generics actually might not be the worst option. Yeah, so despite having 0 personal stats in all stats, starting with E rank axes, and costing money to recruit, Dua is definitely far from the worst a Conquest unit can be.
Yeah, it turns out that Dua is, in a lot of ways, bad enough that he wraps back around to being good and ends up being really powerful. Though, of course, a lot of that is just the mechanics of Fates, making it basically impossible to make a bad unit.
The Einherjar are just in such a good position in Conquest because of how finely tuned its maps are for the solutions it demands of the player, and just being able to bypass that so easily for just 1,500 gold.
Yeah, the maps are just designed in such a way that they have little traps that are basically designed to be sprung once and kill the unit placed in them, and then the map doesn't do anything from there. And so there are so many places when you just look at a map that you can spring that little trap with Dua, and then just the map becomes a cakewalk from there.
In the context of Fire Emblem units, the worst unit in series history discussion, Dua definitely does not belong down there.
No, the mechanics of Fates just keep any unit from Fates so far away from those worst unit ever discussions, especially a unit like Dua, because even if all you ever use him for is killing him, at least you can kill him multiple times. whereas the other terrible units like Bantu, you could only do it once.
Although, in Birthright, I would say that Nanaki, Hachio, and Konoe are in a far worse position than any of the Nori and Einherjar.
Birthright maps just don't lend themselves as effectively to sacrifice strats. Turns out negating one enemy's turn when you have to fight 15 that enemy phase just doesn't do too much for you.
Yeah, so if you're talking worst unit in series history, I would say that the ones you unlock from the level 3 Hoshiden Armory are up there in the context of purely Birthrights.
Yeah, but the Conquest ones are they're genuinely quite useful. Yeah, the Birthright ones even basically have worse classes, because a class like Fighter or Troubadour, you're just happy to have more of around, whereas the Birthright ones aren't coming in classes that just innately have strong qualities to apply that you don't already have.
Yeah, the tier 3 ones are Oni Savage, Apothecary, and Sky Knight, which in the context of Birthright, less appealing than the tier 3 classes that you get from Conquest, being Knight and Wyvern Rider.
I suppose you could fly the Sky Knight across the canals in the Super Chapter, and then not care about them getting shot by Bow Knights after.
That's true.
That's something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about the most I can think of for them, whereas the Conquest ones definitely have a lot more application.
Yeah. Alright, is there anything else you have to add? Anything else you want to plug at the end of this video? It's been a while.
Yeah, I actually haven't uploaded in a while, but I'll still mention my YouTube channel. I will probably get back to uploading on it at some point, who knows when.
I've been saying the same thing. I believe in you.
Yeah. Other than that, don't really have anything to plug, but thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
It's always a blast.